Welcome to the Great State Mural, Mongolia Portrayed, where we discuss Mongolia's social and political issues in depth. This is Anand Tomurtawa. I'm joined by Dölkan Alter
Oh, hi, everyone. Good to be back.
and also Julian Durkis.
Hello, you two, and hello, world.
So, in today's topic, we'll be talking about Zandanshatar's appointment as the new prime minister and also talk about his new cabinet and how it differs from the old one. Uh, just to give you a heads up, former Prime Minister Oyurtun resigned on June 3rd, and on June 9th, the Mongolian People's Congress decided on nominating the former speaker, Zandanshatar, to become the next Prime Minister of Mongolia. And he was formally appointed as Prime Minister on June 13th, almost at midnight, by Parliament. Overwhelmingly 90% of the parliamentarians were present there, voted in favor of him becoming the new prime minister. Before we begin, we'll have a recurring setups for each episode. That setup will be the three universals. For those who don't know, the Mongolian folk tradition of the three universals is a type of traditional Mongolian folk saying, kind of like poetic wisdom passed down through three generations. Each one is made up of three short lines, and what's cool about them is that they can express everything from everyday truths to deep philosophical ideas, all in a really simple and clever way. And we will have our own three universal sayings pertaining to each episode topic. And in today's three universals are the three promises: the promise to continue the status quo, the promise of gender equity, the promise to be more fiscally responsible. On with the show. Can you tell us maybe who Zandanshatar is as a person to our audience?
Yeah, I think a few things stand out when we think about Zandanshatar. Of course, I don't know his personality or very personal things, but at least looking at his bio, first of all, he's a technocrat and a diplomat and an experienced politician. Interesting to note that he graduated in Russia during the USSR, Soviet Union, and his graduation was in 1992 as we were starting the new government here. And he entered really kind of governmental positions around 2003, so 20 years ago. It's considered as relatively long by Mongolian standards, I guess. So he started as a Minister of Agriculture during that time. And before that, he was in Central Bank between 1998 and 2003. In addition to that, we say he's a diplomat because he was a Minister of Foreign Affairs around 2009 and 12. So in addition to that, he's also a loyalist. As we can see, all his career, he was with MPP and at all levels, especially he's very closely aligned with the party leadership during all this time of 20 years. And sometimes he's seen as also an academic. He started his career as a university lecturer early on, and he did his fellowship at University of Stanford later on as well. So he has this package. And I think that's interesting that seeing these three potential characters, he was perhaps selected this time as the prime minister to be someone less controversial, less involved in political and various corruption scandals, someone who can be accepted by different parties and factions. So that's my take. What are your thoughts on this, guys?
It's interesting, Dolgan, that you mentioned the time he spent at Stanford, because he has that in common with former President Ebekdoj. And the other thing that two of them have in common, that in my mind, they're the two only active politicians who've initiated democratization initiative. With Ebekdoj, that was the citizen halls that got to vote on local development funds. And that still seems to be going on, though it hasn't, in the long term, I don't know that it's really had that much of an impact. With Zandanshatar, it's deliberative polling, and this is sort of a Stanford copyrighted method, right? Which attempts to bring together a group of citizens to deliberate about an issue, and then to run polls around this issue to advise government action. And so, in 2017, when this was introduced, they ran a version of this. I'd have to, and it really had the intention of reinvigorating, focusing more on policy and democracy and all those good things. I think the impact has been very, very limited. In that that initial attempt of a deliberative poll was criticized by some as sort of ill-prepared, and it didn't really take root. And it really was a bit of a personal pet project more than anything. The law is still on the books. And so it's interesting that now that he's become prime minister, whether he's going to revive that in any way, but also in a situation where there's concern around Mongolian democracy, the fact that this is one of the few politicians who has made an attempt to do something about democracy and change it is noticeable to me. By contrast, of course, he starts out with a little bit of a mark on his record, and that's because he lost the election, right, Anand?
Yeah, he lost the last parliamentary election in 2024, um, but I feel like it was not his fault per se. Uh, there was a big scandal of a campaigner from the opposition, from the Democratic Party side, who died by the hands of the MPP campaigner, and I think that actually shifted within the district, which he also initiated of splitting into a region, not by provinces. There was a lot of questioning about his legitimacy over becoming prime minister, where he doesn't have a seat in parliament, don't last long, and also don't have the legitimacy to propose any kind of legislations or change that would be proposed into parliament. Those kind of sentiments were echoed by some of the parliamentarians, especially from the National Coalition Party, where Zandanshatar, when he was forming his cabinet, invited the National Coalition Party to be part of his cabinet. And the National Coalition leadership, Namtavai, rejected his offer, stating that he didn't want to be associated with a person who does not have legitimacy from the people. But there's one exception to that rule of a prime minister who don't have a seat in parliament, and that was the current president, Hurulsuh, who not only didn't have a seat in parliament in 2017, but he ousted his leader, and then afterwards he was the first ever prime minister to win a confidence vote in Mongolia, and ultimately championing his party to a second election in 2020, and then afterwards becoming president. And also, you could argue that he might have been the catalyst in the downfall of Ayurden's resignation, and nominating his chief of staff, the former speaker Zandanshatar, to the position of prime minister.
So that's a little bit on who Zandanshatar is. And we talked about that, or we've known about that for a week or so, but the news on his cabinet is a bit fresher. So maybe as a second big theme now, let's get into the cabinet. What's the state of the coalition, Anand? Where we're at?
The state of the coalition is still alive without the Democratic Party, of course, where Ayurden's scandal of Chanel bags and of lavish living, where he tried to de-escalate it by pointing fingers at the DP for not being a good partner in the government, and ultimately decided that they will kick out the Democratic Party and will not form a coalition if the new government comes to be, which did happen. But now we have a new cabinet with as a coalition of three parties: Mongolian People's Party, the Hun Party, and the Civil Will Green Party. As I mentioned before, Zandanshatar did invite the third smaller party of the National Coalition, but again, as I mentioned before, they rejected his offer. So my question for you guys is, do you guys find anything surprising from Zandanshatar's new coalition?
Well, maybe we'll start with sort of broad structure. Oyonyan had created these posts in cabinet for national committees of evaluation of the 20-minute city, maybe a particularly odd one. But anyway, those have been abolished. They're out. So cabinet is smaller, even though the number of ministries hasn't been reduced. But there's a little bit of a change. I think most governments, when they come in around the world, they make some of these changes. That was the change. Out are the committees. How new are the people appointed, Tokyon? Is this largely the old crowd or is it some new faces?
It's like 50-50. 50% of the new. This government has now 19 ministers. The previous one had 22 ministers. 50% are previous, coming from the previous government. So Zandanshatar's explanation is that we have institutional knowledge and we can continue, and especially in the context of foreign, really the need to attract foreign development investment. The key rhetoric this government has been trying to give is to keep the status quo and policy stability and political stability. So in that way, he's kind of assuring that by keeping 50%. But there's a lot of criticism and questions about this, why he kept those specific ministers. For example, we have the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Minister, the two deputy ministers coming from the previous government, and they were the least popular ministers, especially related to, if you think about the new parliament, since within a year, it's now the fourth time they're going to amend the budget. So what does it say about the capacity and quality of the finance minister? So the fact that he's kind of continuing this term is very questionable. Also, there are like new figures like Inchbayer, who was widely associated with the SME fund. So all these promises about accountability, credibility, reform is questionable. What's your take on this?
I have a question of like, aside from the DP ministers being changed, obviously, like the non-DP members who were changed within the party, like for let's say the cultural minister changed, and also the health minister, and who else was there? I think those two were the Mongolian People's Party, but they changed those positions. Aside from that, I think most of them are still the same, and I think the one downgrade is we had three female ministers, but now we have two female ministers. So maybe a downgrade in gender equity also.
Yeah, in terms of percentage, it's like now around 10% of the cabinet is women, whereas before we had 4 women out of 2022.
So I think it was 3, right?
4, but Tsegotuntuya, Pasantuya, and Nemen, I think.
But Bolgontoya was not a minister. She's still the deputy speaker.
Oh, I see. So there's a decline in terms of nominal. Yeah.
Really kind of shocking though, right? To only have 2 ministers at this point. I mean, there's lots of quality expertise amongst the women in parliament. Even if you restrict yourself to MPs, there's a greater number of MPs. And so disappointing. Just on the surface of just sort of counting people, it's disappointing, and it's a disappointing symbol, I would say.
Yeah, I would have liked to seen again, like as the Dojgon mentioned about Boltontoya, I would like to have seen her become part of the cabinet. She did serve as the she was part of the cabinet before, but I think she would have probably been a good finance minister in my mind, or at least like a deputy prime minister's position. But yeah, it seems shameful that there's a lot of women who are knowledgeable, like MP Institute, who has extensive knowledge and energy, and you still have Chojil. I don't know if he has any kind of expertise in energy.
And especially given the recent scandals of the explosion at power plant number 3. Like, what other symbolic and real life failure do you need to be held accountable, right?
Yeah. Also, to me, the Otral's position as the head deputy prime minister, moving away from the how do you say it in English?
Cabinet secretary.
Cabinet secretary. To me, I don't know what your guys' position is, but to me, seems like a promotion in the sense that maybe that they want to have Ochot as the next prime minister and giving him that top billing of deputy prime minister. What do you guys think about on that part?
Yes, I'm sure he started as a minister of digital, how you call it, the Minister of Communication and Digital Development, etc. So
I think digital development is what it was called in English, right?
Yeah. So he started from that. Then he was now promoted to cabinet secretary and now as deputy. So his trajectory is for sure upwards. As long as MPP is in power, we see that potentially he has at least some future in that case.
Well, he also has the second title of Minister of Economic Development, also, right? And does that say anything?
I think of Charles, I was very surprised. He ran for election from my constituency in Chingalde district, and I was speaking to my family, who are they planning to vote, and they were saying of Charles. I was like, what? He's the one who were trying to pass a law restricting freedom of speech and social media. He made a record in Mongolian almost legal history where the parliament passed the law on the law on digital rights and human rights in the digital environment,
protection of kids.
In just 2 days the parliament passed it. So it's a kind of, I was very shocked that people already forgot about it, and when I raised it, to remember he really tried to expedite this law, and Zandanshatar was the one presiding the chairing the parliament at the time. So the combination of these two to me sound very dangerous. And my family, they were like, oh yeah, we totally forgot. It just looks like he did really great job. And now that you mentioned, Julian, about just symbolic ranking increase, but I think that's the image they precisely want to give, that yes, he's now closer to the prime minister's position. And people don't really remember whether he's done actual work or not.
For that bill of like trying to restrict the media, I think a lot of regular people didn't have any understanding of it. Most of the people who are opposed to it were mainly people from the media side and from the civil society side, and they were quite how can I say, like loud, and I think that kind of pressure maybe helped it to stop by the veto of the president. And aside from that, I think not many people know about that kind of an angle. There was few, but I still don't understand why he is so popular. Also, it's just like he doesn't have any kind of a good backing from his past. He used to be a former rapper.
Was he any good as a rapper? I don't think I've ever heard any of his stuff.
I never listened to his song, so I cannot comment on it.
Yeah, so he's not in that great line of popular singers with Jaflan, who of course was the all-time
he's not
great
considered
MPP
a
singer.
rapper, I would say. No. He tried to do some rapping, yeah.
Interesting what you said, Dogan, about what you heard from your family or otherwise, and what that says about the importance of titles, right, and positions held, and the extent to which a lot of Mongolian politics doesn't necessarily revolve around actual achievement of goals, implementing legislation or policies, but stays in the symbolic level. This, of course, is not unique to Mongolia at all, but maybe we're seeing a little bit of that in this particular cabinet as well. Along those lines, I'll certainly claim symbolic victory. Yes, I have placed my first student in cabinet. I am so delighted. Damdinyan has become Minister of Mining. He spent a fair bit of time at the University of British Columbia when I was still teaching there. And every time I've visited Ulaanbaatar, the last couple times when I arrive, he sends me a quick message that he's out of town. So he seems to be running away from me, but I'm going to be keeping a close eye on what the Ministry of Mining does. And I'm sort of personally delighted, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, has he finished that famous Dachni Tam, the road in Dachang? And it was an ongoing pain point for him, right?
I never have seen him in a backhoe or in some kind of a planer on the road building it himself. But I've driven the road. I mean, it seems to be in better shape now, right?
It is in better shape now, I would say. It's a good road, but yes, it was a pain point for him. Also, I don't know. I didn't like his legislation on trying to push what was it, the Cambridge education or the Cambridge language thing. It I think that totally bombed. It did not really gel within the on how Mongolian society worked or the education system worked. But do you think he has the upsides and maybe in the in the Ministry of Mining? I feel like in my mind that he was appointed in that position because he does have like a lot of Western views.
I think
Yes, no?
just sorry, Julian. I think the just general impression I get from this new cabinet forming is that it's a really like a mixed bag, and most of them don't seem to be based on, like we discussed in our last episode, meritocracy or capacity. Just looking at the number of women ministers, etc. It seems like a much more political and gesture to appease different factions and different interests within the parliament today. So it really doesn't feel like a fresh start that the public and the protesters have been wanting and asking for. It really doesn't feel like there will be any significant reform, increased transparency, or better budget spending, etc. So it's a bit kind of disappointing to see this appointment, frankly, and it just shows like, is this another political kind of carousel with new paint?
Yeah, we're sort of getting into a bit of an outlook here, right? Now that we've talked about who is in and but what does that mean for the future, right? And I think I agree with what you've just said, Dorgan, that I don't see anything in this cabinet that makes me think, oh, we're going to see a big initiative or a big change in any direction. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because continuity also has its virtues. But given that there has been protest in some areas, and maybe to single out particularly the area of corruption, I don't know that the Chanel handbag actually brought Oyenan down, really. But there is this sense, right, that people mobilize around corruption, and there's nothing in this cabinet or the announcements that Zandanshatar has made so far that make me think that there's really going to be a change in terms of how corruption is going to be addressed. And that remains not just an issue that brings out protesters, but it's a real cancer on the Mongolian economy, but also on social relations. And so this seems like this isn't going to be the government that's really going to tackle that in a way that ultimately is going to be necessary.
Yeah. On that point, like when the last government when Oyuritan was forming this his cabinet, and when he invited the DP and the Hung into the Grand Coalition, I think there was a lot of distaste or disappointment from the Hun supporters. They said that they basically sold their soul, or they're just an armpit, almost kind of a party for the Mongolian People's Party. And my question for you guys is that for this government to again actually forming a coalition with the trying to form it with the three smaller parties, and forming with two, and the other party rejecting that offer, do you think that actually gives more legitimacy towards the national coalition, and also maybe downgrades the legitimacy of the Civil Will Green Party?
Yes, I think also the protesters and also what the public could not understand is why MPP, if they won over the majority in parliament, why are they not forming their own government and taking the full responsibility? Instead, in both attempts, forming coalitions with Home Party and now with the Civil Will and Green Party. So it's still a disappointment for everyone. But if anything, there's only one good, if any phenomenon has a good side, we're discussing before that perhaps the fact that DP, Democratic Party, is now out and can serve as a real opposition is the only hope in this scenario. And we already saw in the parliamentary sessions as well, DP members were much more aggressive and much more questioning about the new government, etc. So we see that opposition growing, right?
But do you think that the national coalition not joining this government makes them almost like a winner in terms of from outside view?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if people really pay attention to those things. Around the time of the next election, this will be already long forgotten move, and that's why I think Home Party really wants to still remain in the government, because they will have coverage, they will have some kind of presence in politics. They want to desperately prove that they can run politics, and of course it has a lot of detriments for them.
So you think that the Home Party will win an election, will gain seats in the next election?
I'm not sure, but let's see what their final move will be. Who knows? In around 2028, there could be any recent developments, and people's memory are not that fresh around that time, as in the case of Portugal I was speaking about. Suddenly, Home Party might pose themselves as amazing opposition, who knows, or victims.
Well, one of the things that this reinforces is that party competition isn't necessarily policy or ideological competition in Mongolia as much as one might wish, right? That the fact that coalitions can just kind of form around no particular issue, it's not like the Civil Green Party addition or replacement of the DP changes the direction this government is going to take. And so then what's the point of these kind of coalitions? And at what point are voters going to ask, well, okay, so I want to know what you're going to do. And if you're just joining any old coalition, then that doesn't tell me a whole lot. And so I think it does reinforce that kind of pattern rather than that it strengthens a particular position for the national coalition or anyone else. So we've kind of gone over Zandanshatar and the events. We've looked at a new cabinet. We started out with 3 promises, right? We said the promise to continue the status quo, the promise of gender equity, and the promise to be more fiscally responsible. We didn't end up talking about the budget very much, but what's the score a week in of this prime minister? Which promises is he keeping? Which ones is he already breaking, if any?
Well, he did not specifically say that he will keep the gender equity, but he alluded to it, so he did not keep that promise. And in that sense, so it's maybe like a 60% at this moment. And we will see.
And we really hope, Julian, you mentioned earlier that he will continue. This is also a good thing. I hope this new cabinet, especially under Zandanshatar, will not continue his very close mega projects with Russia's side, including the parliamentary commissions with. And I found it almost ironic that the current speaker during the ceremony of the swearing of the new cabinet told to the new prime minister and the other ministers that they should really adhere and follow the law and legislation. That was like a key point in his speech. And I felt like it was almost like a go with the ex-speaker, who's the current prime minister, that he hasn't really followed it. And during his term, in just 4 years, more than 50 laws were expedited and passed in without any consultation. So I think hopefully these points will not be continued and further promises will not be broken.
All right, what a nice wrap up. And you know what? This will give us lots to talk about in future episodes. Continuity or not, it'll raise issues that we'll want to talk about.
Well, thanks. I think next time we will also talk about the impact of this cabinet on democratization, our interesting topic.
Well, it's been great talking to you. I hope our audience, numerous as they have become, also enjoyed this conversation and feels informed. We are eager for your feedback and keen to hear any responses you might have. Please do subscribe on all the various platforms. Do give us 5 stars. We know that matters in people finding us. And then remind us where people can reach us best.
So they can reach us at the moment at info@agulamedia.com. Also, maybe at our socials. Most of my social media handles are Anand Dartan. You could just Google that or like put that in any of the socials. You'll find me, and you can also help us keep this production in a high quality by maybe chipping in a few dollars, and you can do that at buymecoffee.com /GreatStatemural. Moving forward, we'll be moving towards a more of a bi-weekly episode basis. So the next episode will be in 2 weeks after this episode. More of a lighter theme about the 3 universals and our perspectives on that. And hope we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye.